Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Bob the Booker, and today normal service is resumed and I'm back on my nonsense of going through the Booker Prize shortlists. Just generally this year, hopefully, my plan is to go through quite a lot of Booker shortlists, particularly all the ones from the 1970s, and then all of the ones ending in 1 and 6, all the way kind of leading up around or leading back from the 2021 winners that we'll hear about this year. So with that in mind, I've decided to go completely off and look at 2004, mostly because this is a year where all of the books just happen to be in my house at the same time, because I got them from the library ages ago and then sort of very stubbornly held on to them for the longest time. And I've only really read them recently because I needed to give them back. So, with that in mind, I've been reading the 2004 Booker shortlist. Now, this is a shortlist that has a couple of books on there that I had been meaning to read for a very long time. A couple of books that I had absolutely never heard of, same as some of the authors, and also where I read the winner years and years ago and then sort of refreshed fairly recently. So we start with then the winner, Andrew Hollinghurst's The Line of Beauty. Now this book I think is absolutely stunning. It is set during kind of Thatcher era Britain. So kind of particularly around the kind of early 80s, and it focuses on sort of a number of kind of characters, particularly characters in a gay male relationship. And there is an added difficulty to that because there is one of the men is staying with the family of somebody who has a kind of line to Thatcher in some ways through politics. And for those of you who don't know, in the 80s, Thatcher's government was responsible for quite a lot of if not directly anti-LGBT legislation itself, it definitely didn't help in many matters, and definitely the media at the time was particularly harsh on LGBT people. This is also, the time of the AIDS crisis, so there are lots of kind of competing factors and complicating factors that made life really quite difficult for LGBTQ people at the time. It was a time where a lot of people were fighting for their rights, but also, the media furore around gay people was often horrendous. For example, Thatcher, even in Parliament, I believe it was, said that in implementing Section 28, which was a law that made it so that teachers and schools more generally weren't allowed to talk about same-sex relationships or LGBTQ people in any way. When speaking about that, Thatcher said things like, children are going to grow up feeling that they have I'm paraphrasing here, but an inalienable right to be gay. And yeah, not cool, Maggie. So this book is set during that time. So Andrew Hollinghurst, I think what is so beautiful about this book is how it really manages to capture the tenderness of this loving relationship between these men. There's a kind of it always feels a bit like Maurice by, I want to say, Ian Forster, in the sense that there is this other man, this one man is kind of quite middle class. He's kind of living with this this family who are linked to the Conservative Party and kind of linked to Thatcher's government and cabinet, and kind of quite a lot of wealth and kind of privilege. And he in this kind of relationship, he also sort of starts dating someone who is outside of that in some ways as well. And Hollinghurst, I mean, something I've not read that many of his books, but the ones I have read, I've just been so in awe of just the way he writes so beautifully and powerfully. There is such a tenderness and a beauty to the way he captures identities and captures love and kind of togetherness, but also kind of set against that very kind of middle class, snippy kind of snobbishness. And I think it's just done so beautifully in this book. I remember as a little gay kid watching the TV adaptation of this, So I think I must have been sort of 17, 18 or so when the adaptation came out. And I just remember thinking it was just absolutely beautiful. And, you know, for someone born in 89, kind of right towards the end of sort of Thatcher's time in government, this, you know, was stuff that I had no idea about. This was the kind of, you know, the historic thing in very recent times in Britain that has really shaped a lot of people's identities. You know, for example, when I was at school, Section 28 was still in place for most of the time I was at school, which meant that, you know, it was teachers around me never spoke about LGBT people. And even after Section 28 passed, you had teachers who had for years not been allowed to mention that. And so it just wasn't part of their vocabulary. So this had a really big dramatic impact on kind of life in the UK. Anyway, I'm talking far more about Thatcher's Britain than I am about this book, but I think this book is absolutely stunning. I'm not surprised that it won. I believe as well in that happening, he was the first openly gay author to win the Booker Prize as well, which is really quite special. And it's only sort of happened twice, I believe, since, with Marlon James and with Douglas Stewart most recently. So I mean, absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous book. That's just so rich and warm and tender, and I'm so glad that this book was picked up and given that little kind of push forward by the Booker Prize, especially as Alan Hollinghurst is just such a delightful writer. Now on to something really quite different. We have Achmat Dangor's Bitter Fruit, which is quite brutal and quite violent, and it's, how to try and describe it, it's concerned a lot around violence, and particularly sexual violence, for a family within South Africa. So, you know, South African politics I don't know a great deal about, but, you know, with the kind of time that's being written about in this book, there is so much that's going on. You know, there is a kind of an undercurrent of threat and danger in all of these characters' lives. There is a woman, you know, we start the book off learning about a character having been raped. So this is by no means a comfortable read, really at all. And then we get kind of further themes around violence, sexual violence, around racism and homophobia. There is even a sort of indication around incest. You know, there is a lot in this book that is really not that easy to stomach. And it was interesting looking at the Goodreads reviews on this, because it really seemed to divide people. Some people finding the brutality of the themes and of the language kind of exploitative or too much for them. Other people finding it really kind of powerful and I wouldn't say stunning. Stunning's maybe not the right word. Or you can be stunned in a negative way, I guess, but also, yeah, just kind of overwhelmed by just the force of this. And you know, sometimes books have to deal with quite difficult subject matter because sometimes that's the only way people can process some of these things. So definitely not an easy book, but it concerns quite a lot about how some of these characters are trapped because of various roles that they have within society. I mean, this is actually a bit of a theme that we see through these books. And for the 2004 shortlist. But yeah, I think what's really special about this book that Dangor manages to achieve is giving the main characters a way of kind of explaining things that seem so sort of inexplicable. So the character Lydia sort of processing her feelings around having been assaulted, having been raped. There is a lot of kind of space given to her trying to work out what it is and kind of how she sort of reclaims her body and all of those sorts of things. It's a really not easy reading, but you know, it's interesting sort of seeing how Dangor is not kind of afraid to go there, essentially. You know, he really delves in and gets to the kind of the grittiest moments of these character stories. So there is a young man, one the son, Michael, or Mikey as he's sometimes known throughout the book. He finds out that he is the child that was born from his mother having been assaulted. And again, really not easy reading, but it then sort of deals with how does he process what that means for him about his sense of who his father is and his sense of identity. And it feels like all of these characters are trapped within these sort of almost like something predestined, you know, that this kind of the really harsh conditions that some of them are in, either because of institutional racism or because of violence or because of something that they've done or had something that's happened to them, they all seem to be trapped. And it's kind of is interesting to see how they try to argue their way out or find their way out or whatever. It's a tricky one, and so I can see why this book split so many people. But also I can see definitely why it made it onto the shortlist. For me, I think occasionally, I don't know if maybe wishing for some hope in the book is too much. I don't know if that undermines the idea of the message. But yeah, I think it's still a very, very powerful book. And if it sounds like something that may interest you, I would, you know, encourage you to pick it up, but obviously with a heavy warning that it is not a comfortable read, and for people with any sort of specific triggers, not going to be the easiest. So yeah, it's a tricky one. Anyway, from that, we then go to another book on this list, which is Sarah Hall with The Electric Michelangelo. Now, I spoke about this a little bit in my wrap-up recently for March. And Sarah Hall is the only woman on this shortlist. This is a really quite weird thing, actually, when you go through kind of some of the earlier shortlists, where sometimes there's a whole shortlist with only one woman, and you do sort of wonder, you sort of do think like there were, you know, I'm sure there were many other brilliant books written by women that year. It's always weird to see how it falls sometimes, where you know. And when we come to 1991, we'll talk about how there were no women at all in the shortlist, which created the Women's Prize, you know, kind of led to the creation of the Women's Prize. So anyway, Sarah Hall with The Electric Michelangelo. So this is all about a kind of community of tattoo artists and kind of circus, for want of a better word, circus people, like people who are kind of in the entertainment industry around things like circuses and boardwalks, all of those kinds of things. So, for example, there's a tattoo parlor. There is I hate the term, but a kind of freak show, kind of in a P.T. Barnum style way of, you know, the bearded lady, the person who can, I don't know, whatever. I can't think of any really good examples, but essentially those kinds of fairs, fairground kind of is the sort of, I guess, what I'm looking for there in terms of the word. And so it's interesting because alongside this set of characters who are really broad and varied, because, you know, some of them are the kind of, again, I hate this term, but kind of freaks who work in this environment. Alongside them, you know, you've got people who are just kind of, you know, trying to eke out a living, and this sort of takes place a bit in a northern town in the UK, and then in, I want to say, New Jersey as well. So it's this kind of, it spans all of these times. It's Victorian, I was sort of set around sort of Victorian times in parts, where it feels a bit sort of steampunky. It also then kind of has this really interesting moment where we see the transition to the world of TV and how many people stop going to these sort of fairgrounds and these attractions because they can see far more shocking and far more in-depth things on the TV now, or, you know, where people come back a year after to a fairground and things don't shock them or surprise them the way that they used to. This kind of idea that these fairgrounds have to just keep making themselves more and more extreme to keep up. And in the meantime, we have this really quite interesting character in the middle who, I want to say Sai, who is trying to, you know, eke out this living as a tattoo artist. And it's interesting. There were times in this book that I kind of wasn't necessarily getting on with it, but, you know, sometimes where you're reading and you can't quite work out if it's the author or you're having a bit of a brain fog moment. And I think it was me, because there were passages of this that I just thought was stunning. There's at one point a description of the fairground leading into the age of TV, and that all happens over about 3 or 4 pages, and it's absolutely stunning. I have to admit, I've not really read anything else by Sarah Hall, but I know she's also she was longlisted another time for How to Paint a Dead Man, I believe it was. And, you know, she's really well known, I think, well, a bit more well known for her short stories as well. So I definitely need to go and check those out, because there are definite moments of this book that I thought were really interesting. And just showed her real talent as a writer coming through, of just these absolutely beautiful florid descriptions of neighborhoods and areas and changing attitudes and people's voices, that I just thought was really, really interesting. Next up is a book that I had heard so much about, people constantly raving about it always being seen as one of those books that everyone, you know, every kind of list of the best books published in the 21st century, or the best books published, you know, in the early 2000s or whatever, people always mention this book. And that book is Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. So I had heard so much about it that I wasn't really sure what to expect, weirdly, because I think everyone had raved about it, but without saying anything about the story. So I went into this pretty open, not really knowing anything about what happens or what it's about. And then as a result was completely thrown, because it was entirely different to what I thought it was. I think I'd vaguely heard that it was 6 interlocking stories, and in my mind I saw that as being, you know, 6 characters across London in one day, or, you know, something like that. In fact, these 6 characters span hundreds and hundreds of years. We start with a man on a ship, like a kind of trading vessel, and his sort of journal, and then we go to these characters who are living in, well, a set of letters from one character to another, in one of them is living in Belgium, and that's kind of still kind of in the past. It then goes to a mystery novel, or kind of mystery story kind of thing. It then goes to this kind of comic story of this other character, Timothy Cavendish, who is just having the absolute worst time. And then we go into the future with this part, so I'm just sort of flicking as we're going to remind myself. This middle bit called, or kind of later bit called An Horizon of Sonmi, which is kind of about this sort of future moment with robots. And then we come to this sort of what's believed to be a sort of post-apocalyptic world, told in really strong dialect, and the book is such that it kind of goes from past, you know, from the furthest back in the past to the most future, and then does that trajectory back again. So the middle of the book, you know, that the exact middle passage is all the bit about the kind of post-apocalyptic world, and there is a kind of kernel of connection between each part. So for example, the diary in the beginning is then referenced in the next part with these sort of 2 men writing letters to each other, and then in the story that's written, pardon me, we have reference back to the 2 men writing letters to each other. Then that story, that kind of mystery novel story, is a manuscript that Timothy Cavendish is reading in the next part. Then the next characters have a film of Timothy Cavendish's terrible life, that is sort of set up as a bit of a mock comedy thing, but that they really enjoy. And then sort of later we find that there's a statue erected towards him. It's so bizarre how these parts are connected. And, you know, I think a lot of people kind of commenting on it sort of talk about how he sort of explodes this idea of what the novel is, because we've got 6 very different writing styles over 6 very different historical periods, loosely connected in some cases by sort of tiny moments and sort of tiny connections between people. And all of that, you know, over 500 pages is a novel. It's classed as a novel, even though to some degree it's 6, or sort of 11 or 12 short stories interconnected by various means. And, you know, and some of those, so the Sonmi parts are done as a sort of interview, with both sides recorded. We've got one is sort of written as a farcical comedy, others are written as diary entries. We've got letters, a diary itself, yeah, and then this kind of other rambling story towards the middle. So it's really quite a bizarre bizarre book, and completely not what I was expecting. For me, I get where the love is for this book, and there were large parts of this that I really heavily enjoyed. Heavily enjoyed? Can you heavily enjoy something? Greatly enjoyed. But for me, I don't know if all the parts were as successful for me. So, for example, I really started on a bad foot with this because I started reading the diary part at the beginning that's written in sort of slightly older language, and I just could not connect with it at all, nor did I really care about it. Then we went on to the letters, which I found really successful and really enjoyed. Then when we got onto the mystery novel, I found that bit quite funny and quite entertaining. The same for the Timothy Cavendish bits. But then when we got to Sonmi and the middle part, the sort of sluices, crossing and everything over, I kind of lost it a bit there. For me, it felt a bit at times like it was really just, I couldn't tell if it was being a parody of itself or whether it was actually deadly serious and whether I just should sort of leave it. So I know that some people adore this novel and I couldn't get on with every part. I think overall I still enjoyed it quite a bit, and I see why it was on a shortlist. It was that kind of novel as well that apparently I think was everywhere that year. I seem to remember seeing it a lot when I was 15. Yeah, it's a very weird book, and I normally quite like weird books, and the fact that I'm not fully on board the Cloud Atlas train is making me think, I don't know, you know, is it my problem? No, it's the Cloud Atlas that is wrong. I don't know, it's weird. But yeah, I think there's a lot of really good stuff to this book. I can see why people love it. Just for me, of the 6 parts, I don't know, I would maybe have wanted 3 parts done to a similar level of quality. And I think I would have really enjoyed it then, because it sort of does seem like we take a massive jump into a sort of robot-esque future where Korea seems to have sort of taken over vast parts of the world, which is never really explained. And then we go to this sort of post-apocalyptic world and we don't really have that much of a sense of what's happened in between. Maybe that's the point, I don't know. But yeah, for me, didn't always work, but I thought was at least interesting nonetheless. And that takes us to the last 2 books on this shortlist. So next up, we have Colm Toibin with The Master. Now, I've rambled about his book, The Blackwater Lightship, before, which I adored, and I just was one of my absolute favourite books from last year, although it was written back in 1999, or published then. And I thought that was stunning, and I'd also read The Testament of Mary by him and also really enjoyed that. And then we come to the book The Master by Colm Toibin. So by this point, I think this was his second Booker nomination, and he would get shortlisted again later for 2013 with Testament of Mary, which I again really enjoyed. But The Master, I don't know, it was a bit of a strange one for me. Now, what I will say for sort of Toibin is he's very good at sort of, he can be an absolute chameleon with his writing style. From just the books I've seen so far of his, The Blackwater Lightship is this really rich Irish family drama, and he's brilliant at capturing the voices. The Testament of Mary kind of delves into the sort of everybody talking about, you know, the birth of someone who may or may not be Jesus, and it's kind of written in that style as well. And in The Master, Toibin is writing about Henry James, and this book is written very much in the style of Henry James. As in, I think if I hadn't known the subject matter, I think pretty much off the top of my head, just reading it, I would have felt a very Henry James vibe from this. And I can't exactly tell what that is. I just know that it feels very Henry James. It's maybe these sort of long, meandering descriptions that interestingly don't really seem to give too much away. There's a lot of subtlety about characters glancing a certain way, those kinds of things. Admittedly, my grasp of Henry James is fairly weak. I think I've only read maybe The Spoils of Poynton and Portrait of a Lady, and that was at uni, so that was a very long time ago. And so I found it really interesting, especially actually because so much of this book focuses around this area in, I want to say it's in Rye, called Lamb's House, where Henry James lived for a while. And I sort of suddenly realised as it was kind of going on, I realised I visited that just before, I think literally just before lockdown hit. I was in Rye and it's a National Trust property. And I went there with a couple of friends, and the friends hadn't heard of Henry James, and I sort of was still. I mean, this is not long ago, obviously, but I think my kind of instant reaction was like, "Oh, Henry James, I remember you. I remember your 600-page book that I had to read for university, and kind of enjoyed mostly." Anyway, I'm rambling, but I thought it was really beautiful at kind of picking up those moments and that kind of sense of space. And I mean, I would be really surprised if Toibin hadn't been there, because it felt like he very much had a sense of place, and of what that kind of house in Rye looks like. And the kind of area, and it's interesting because there are a few little bits where rooms overlook like an alleyway or overlook sort of passageways, and so you can kind of see how an author living in that area would have had an absolute field day. And we kind of get these sort of little moments sort of peppered through of Henry James sort of trying to understand his sexuality, and without kind of retroactively putting labels on people, particularly labels that they may not have given themselves. It's sort of been reported, kind of a few ways, that Henry James is sort of believed to have been bisexual or to have had some kind of same-sex attraction. And that's kind of, there's a sort of servant boy or kind of concierge kind of character who is around, and there's a bit of a weird tension between Henry James and that boy, and it's kind of always really hinted at. At one point these two men, Henry James and another man, I can't remember his name now, lie side by side in bed, and Henry James's heart is pounding, but they're as close as they can be in bed without really touching, or without it really seeming. It's kind of a lot of the unspoken nature of sexuality and of desire, where neither man wants to act on it, because then to do so, particularly in those times, it wouldn't just be, a sort of like, "Oh, sorry, no, I think you've misunderstood." It would, be the loss of his career and, a really strong sense of shame. And we get a lot around Henry James's career. We start the story off with the failure of Henry James's play, which was a real thing. That was a massive moment that really impacted Henry James and his life. He sort of wrote this play, Guy Domville, and was really excited about it. And the friends and family of his who were in the audience, applauded and loved it. But it went down so badly with other paying members of the public that they were even sort of shouting back at characters and heckling and booing and throwing things. And it was, a really big moment for Henry James. He sort of lost a lot of face, lost a lot of sense of identity, and was, I hadn't realised until sort of reading this in the book, because I believe this is sort of factual. It was followed by a play by Oscar Wilde that was immensely successful. And there's a really interesting moment early on in The Master where Henry James is talking to someone about this, and they talk about Oscar Wilde's kind of proclivities and his sort of potential tastes. And obviously this is the time before it was really public about Oscar Wilde having sex with men or having relationships with men. And so Henry James is finding this sort of doubly weird. He's being supplanted, another writer has taken over when his play has failed, and now, Oscar Wilde's plays are thriving, but he's also been bested by another man who is even more public about his sexuality, but is still sort of just flying under the radar at this moment. And so there are lots of parallels between these two men, but Henry James can't help but feel like the worst member. I think also Toibin does some really exciting stuff in this book as well. At one point, it feels quite meta, or kind of very self-aware, let's say, at times. Because at one point, characters are talking, and they talk about how, historical novels are so passé. Obviously, this is an historical novel, written in the 2000s about, Henry James way back. So there's that, which is kind of quite enjoyable. And there are a couple of other references to Oscar Wilde and to people's sexuality, and about kind of how, you're like, oh gosh, that's never going to come out, is it? Or something like that. It's really interesting. So I thought there was a lot to love in this book. Unfortunately for me, the Henry James style occasionally really slowed it down. And there were times where I was reading just getting a little bit, maybe bored is the wrong word, but a little bit kind of like, let's move this along. You know, as much as I like some slow burn kind of novels where a lot happens but it's very subtle, or we kind of get these lengthy descriptions and kind of insights into characters' heads, it felt a little bit too Henry James for me there, and maybe I was just getting flashbacks to university. So I don't think this was as successful for me as maybe some of Toibin's other works, but I can't deny that this is a brilliant historical novel in terms of how he's done the research and how he's thought this through. Just for me, didn't necessarily work as a piece of fiction that I really enjoyed, which sounds really harsh, but I don't think this is any insult to Toibin. This is not necessarily my novel. I know that some people adored this. I just couldn't quite get into it personally. And last, but definitely not least in my opinion, we have Gerard Woodward with I'll Go to Bed at Noon. There we go. So I read this really recently and was absolutely blown away by this book. I wasn't really sure what to expect at all, and I think especially as I was reading, I found out that it was the second in a trilogy, and neither of the other books were shortlisted. So I do need to go back and read those because I won't naturally come across them by doing the shortlists. But I'll Go to Bed at Noon focuses around a family, and apparently this first book really set up a lot of the kind of stuff around this family, but it looks a lot at addiction, particularly alcohol addiction, and it again is not an easy read by any means, but we focus largely on this family in North London, and what's very confusing is there are two characters called Janice. There is Janice Bryan and there's just Janice. I'm guessing a really strong reference there with the whole Janus, the god of two faces, because both Janices are very different men when they are drunk, and that's kind of obviously a big kind of part of addiction, but anyway, that all aside, there's this kind of character Colette at the heart of it, who is sort of in some ways struggling to keep things going, and she's there with her husband. I think a lot of the first book in the trilogy, August I think it's called, focuses a lot more on this husband, but here we got a lot of focus on Colette, and Colette is sort of both, kind of looking, driving off every so often to go and look after her brother, Janice, who is struggling with alcoholism. And we learn a little bit later that, there was a sort of family abuse going on from the father, who, even if he wasn't always physically abusive, definitely always gave the threat of violence in the house. And, there were, almost all the brothers and sisters were terrified of this man. Then Janice, the son of Colette, who really kind of goes off the rails, and again, some really uncomfortable, dark moments to read, where characters are destroying parts of houses to sell things like pipes for money, for booze. We have these sort of passages where characters are trying to manipulate each other to be given access back into people's lives, and so much of this book feels bleak and futile because characters don't get better in a lot of cases here. They seem like they are, and then something horrendous happens, or there's some kind of accident, or it's difficult. It's a difficult book, but for me, I think what saves it from just being an absolute sort of bleak thing for 450 pages is just there are so many beautiful, poignant moments where either addiction is explored and really delved into in a really compassionate and beautiful way, or where characters have these rare moments of joy and warmth. There's this boy Julian, who is the daughter of Colette, son of Colette, and his brother is Janice, who's kind of off the rails and is sort of really struggling. And it's interesting seeing his reaction, because there's this moment where this man, where Janice is kicked out of the house, and Julian, everyone else feels like they should be upset, and that they this is a really horrible moment. You never want to have to kick a son out of their house, but it had to be done. And Julian is ecstatic and is sort of running around celebrating, because for him this is exactly the outcome he needed, and you sort of suddenly realise how he's been held back. I will say, kind of sort of somewhat vulnerable and personal moment here, although I don't have sort of, there isn't a history that I know of sort of addiction and those sorts of things in my house. I did grow up in a situation, I won't really go into it too much here, but in a situation where there was someone incredibly violent and unpleasant in the house for many years. And when he was kicked out, and when he sort of left, that moment of freedom and celebration and relief and lightness was so complicated, because it was kind of a sense of joy that they're gone, but also a kind of terror of what's been lost over the last few years. You know, it shouldn't have to come to that to feel a moment's sense of peace and of rest and relief. Equally, you know, a sense of still looking over your shoulder a little bit. And for me, as a result, whereas I think Julian could be read as a character who is quite cold in those sort of circumstances, actually reading the book, I identified quite a lot with Julian, and I didn't think he was actually that cold. I understood to some degree, obviously it's a different situation, but I could sort of understand how being relieved that somebody wasn't there, and kind of was no longer causing problems, might be something that would cause you to sort of feel a sense of relief, and joy, even in the bleakest circumstances. Anyway, that aside, I thought that this novel was absolutely stunning, in so many ways. The ways that characters had really complex and nuanced feelings around certain things. So Colette, you know, when there are attempts to manipulate her into letting someone back into, you know, letting this son back into her life, back into everyone's lives, she both resists and gives in a way that felt really difficult, but really quite realistic and really quite authentic, because she's kind of complicated. You know, these emotions are complicated by the fact that it's her son, and he needs her, but actually at the same time that she knows that this is going to cause more harm for everybody, and so to protect her other son, she also wants to keep him out. Really beautiful, really nuanced bit of writing. And it's interesting, again, looking at some of the reviews, a lot of people said, you know, that sort of not much happened. For me, I thought so much happened in this book. I was sort of, you know, I had a week off from work, and I was reading this. I sort of read it over about 2 or 3 days, and I was just absolutely enraptured by it. It's a book that I kind of can't believe I'd never heard of, actually. I think this is the interesting thing with going back over old shortlists, is there are books that in the moment judging panels thought, yes, this is a book that's very of the moment, or really we want to champion this book. And then maybe if it isn't a big bestseller or it doesn't take off in many ways, in sort of 10-15 years at a time, people don't really hear about this book. So I'm really intrigued to go back and read the rest now of the trilogy. I think it does work as a really standalone book, personally, because I think enough is given of these. I mean, apart from a bit of confusion early on about Janice and Janice Bryan, which the book does explain, I think actually you can approach this book without having read any of the rest, and I really highly urge you to read it. I think if you enjoy books that are they're not really afraid to go into some difficult and dark issues, but also, you know, kind of family dramas and sort of any things like that. I mean, I'm a sucker for a good family drama. I really am. And I think this is done so beautifully. I was just absolutely carried away within this book. I just thought it was stunning. And I'm really glad that this shortlist has brought this to my attention. So anyway, those are the 6 books that were shortlisted for the 2004 Booker Prize. For me, personal favourites, as you may have been able to tell from my ramblings about them, The Line of Beauty and I'll Go to Bed at Noon, for me, are the 2 standouts. I am very happy that The Line of Beauty won. I think it's a very important novel. I think particularly writing about LGBTQ life during the age of the Thatcher era and during the AIDS crisis. I think that's a really important time, and I think it's really good to capture what that feels like. And I know a lot of Hollinghurst's other work explores some of those themes as well, and the ones I've read of his I just think are beautiful. He's so good. Yes, and I'll Go to Bed at Noon, I think, is another stunning book. I mean, you know, the other four on the shortlist, I can't say that I was disappointed by them. I mean, I still enjoyed them. I think I maybe wouldn't have picked them as my winners. You know, I don't know how the final judging came to it there. Actually, I don't know if there was something else that I don't know. Basically, what kind of was the runner-up, whether The Line of Beauty was a unanimous winner or anything like that. But I mean, still a very strong shortlist, a really broad range of books, albeit a very violent and brutal and issues kind of based shortlist. But I really do urge you to check them all out. I'd love to know your thoughts, particularly on some of the bigger ones like Cloud Atlas or The Master by Colm Toibin. If you read them and had a very different reaction to me, I would love to hear it, because I am intrigued by, you know, what made people either love them or hate them. Yeah, because I fell in a really odd place of overall really liking them but having some issues with them. Anyway, that said, that's been the 2004 shortlist, and other Booker shortlist service shall resume shortly, and I'll be going through the 70s, which is everyone's favourite decade, surely. But I'll be going through and having a little look at some of the books from those, all with a view to looking at most of the 70s before the 2021 long list comes out, which is very soon, probably, I think, maybe. And then it'll be interesting to see, you know, I'll kind of have a little look then, and then hopefully start winding back through the years, on every year ending with a 1 or a 6. Anyway, enough about that. Have a wonderful time. I hope you've enjoyed this. Let me know some other books. If you know of any other books that were published in 2004 that should have been there, let me know. Anyway, lots of love and care. I hope you enjoy your reading. I've been Bob the Booker, rambling about the Booker Prize. Kelsey Breeze. Take care. Bye-bye.